Hello everyone and welcome back to the next episode of the Road to Feed the Master series after yesterday's episode in which I covered as many as 3 games, all of them won against lower rated opponents. Today there is going to be a challenge in front of us because I am going to be playing with black pieces against a better player, not only a better player but a international master from Poland, Bartek Niedbała. We've played 5 years before that, and I drew against him also with black pieces rather comfortably. Back then, he was a junior player who just gained like 200 or 300 rating points. So even though he was significantly higher rated than me, I didn't feel like I'm much worse of a player. However, after those few years, I believe that dynamic has changed a little bit because Bartek proved to be a very good player. He obtained his international master title, while I myself, well, I didn't progress too much if you don't consider last year, because last year obviously I'm putting work into my chess. Nevertheless, I expected the matchup to be tough, and let's see how it went. Bartek opened with d4. I was expecting this move mostly because also we've played like that 5 years ago, even though I knew that recently he plays e4 more frequently. After d4, I've prepared d5 this time. If you remember rounds number 2 and 4, in those games I chose the d6 setup in kind of the King's Indian defense structures. In here I decided to keep things simpler because I am playing against a better player, so I don't want to and don't need to play a strategically unsound position just to get a playable situation. Would be happy to play simple chess and test my opponent in those. My opponent replied with c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, so classical declined queen's gambit, and I expected that my opponent would be prepared against a6 line in here, because when I looked into my database, to my surprise, all of the games at that point of mine were continued with my a6, which I didn't expect. I felt like I am more a versatile player and I chose different move orders. So for that reason, I decided to go with knight f6 this time, and only after my opponent chose knight f3, I chose a6. Why does it matter? Well, because after a6, the variation of cd, ed, queen b3 is a little bit more powerful for the opponent, since if I want to develop normally, there are some bishop g5, e4 ideas on the menu, and if I slow my opponent down by including knight f6, knight f3 moves beforehand, the difference is that even if he goes for such line, which he did, as of now, this move, which is obviously a normal one and developing one, will not be allowing my opponent to create a big initiative. So in here I was thinking about the specific move order because, to be honest, I didn't really check the lines that precisely, unfortunately, before the game, and I knew that in some lines there is a cheeky rook a7, but in here it just felt like it's too much. I had the possibility of playing b5 maybe already, or b6 or c6, and in the end, when put into such situation, recently I learned that the simpler the decision the better, so I just chose a normal bishop e7 development move with the idea of castling straight away afterwards. My opponent developed the bishop, I castled, he played e3, and once more I have the dilemma, quite an important one, and even though it's only move number 8, I felt like it's a critical moment for me. I castled, I finished the kingside development, but what to do about the queenside? So once more, I can have the c5 move on the radar, I can have the b5 move. Rook a7 was all the time on my mind, even though it shouldn't be, I guess. Also in my preparation, in different setup and scenario, I had some knight c6 idea. Strange one, but if played correctly, interesting one. But I was unsure if in this specific setup it also works. So I had plenty of choices to be made. And funny enough, I did not choose any move on the queen side, which was funny enough because I played h6. Why? I didn't want to reveal my setup yet, and I felt like I might be getting chances of achieving the isolated pawn structure. How? Let's see. I expected the move bishop d3 that was naturally played, and only now I struck my opponent in the center with the c5 move. That was my desire, so h6 was a waiting move, but I felt like it might be helpful if I want to pursue with the c5 breakthrough in the center. And not only that, I felt like with the bishop placement and especially the queen's placement, I wanted to wait for such move to be played because after dc5, knight d7, I can then try to recapture the pawn with the fork, perhaps getting additional tempo, and I basically have this additional tempo with h6 being on the board also additionally, so it seemed like a good scenario and kind of hidden. Like you would not normally expect h6 move to be a preparation for an active play, but in here it was. Obviously, if my opponent did not choose bishop d3 but rather some different move order like bishop c1, rook c1, rook d1, maybe it would have been a little bit different. But with bishop d3 being the strongest candidate, I felt like it's worth the gamble and I wanted to go with c5 move, because in the end I felt like I wanted to make use of this misplaced queen, because for example if I went for some c6 setup, I was not that happy with the fact that I am really well prepared against the minority attack of the opponent, but it may never come because the queen is on b3, not allowing the b pawn to be pushed. So maybe my opponent had completely different idea for the game. b5 move was also not the one that I was very happy about, because I would be compromising my pawn structure forever, and I didn't want to quite do that against the international master. So in the end I was quite happy with the fact that I chose this h6 c5 knight b2 d7 idea, because those are the type of positions in which I feel the most comfortable in, and I felt like it suits my style, and also I would go away from the pawn structures that my opponent may have prepared against me, if that makes sense. Okay, so in here, since there is no efficient way to protect the pawn, and also the d5 pawn should not be taken, exemplary variation would be knight d5, and then a very funny line, knight c5, knight e7, king h8. Brilliant move, leaving the queen and the bishop and the knight under the attack, then with the king under the attack and so on. I didn't find this move actually, so only my opponent after the game showed me that. But I was preparing another way of dealing with the situation, which was knight d5, queen a5 check. And if opponent wants to cover the check with the knight, then I can play knight c5, preparing rook d8, and all of those pieces will be under the attack. I'm basically winning tactically, and if my opponent does not want to allow this, he has to move the king like somewhere, perhaps to f1, and even though at this point I am a pawn down, I would be developing very big initiative. And this is something I was working on before the tournament, to be able to not be scared to sacrifice material for the initiative. So I was very glad and happy that finally I put the effort into the game with such idea in mind, and it was working also objectively, so quite happy with that. So either way, knight d5 was not working, but I guess the variation that my opponent showed was a more appealing one, let's say. Okay, for those reasons my opponent simply chose castle, knight takes c5, queen c2, and now I have decision to make what to play from this moment onwards. It's a classic isolated queen pawn structure in which even though the knight on c5 is very well placed, with the knight on c6 I would be a little bit more familiar, because this is what you usually get. Therefore, since the knight's placement is unusual, I also felt like I should be playing unusually, let's say. And in here the tempting choice is to try to exchange the bishop on d3. However, you know the rule that you should not exchange the light pieces when having the isolated pawn. So even though grabbing the bishop pair was tempting, I didn't really want to do it, and I wanted to somehow finish development. And perhaps the best but rather slow way to do it would be to develop the bishop, develop the rook, and then hope for the either of the knights to jump to e4 square. I didn't want to be so passive about it, so I decided to develop the bishop to g4, asking the opponent a question about what is he going to do with the knight. And even though I felt like he does not have to react at all, he might even play a move like, I don't know, like this, even allowing the pin to be on the board, because first of all I don't have any idea how to exploit the pin. Second of all, I'm not really that keen on taking, because open g file combined with the bishop pair would not be the best for me, I guess. At the same time, I felt like my opponent would not be willing to make the game such an imbalanced one, because it might be the scenario in which I would find some good counterplay or whatever. That was my thinking, not really about calculating stuff, but rather thinking about, okay, if my opponent is higher rated, will he think against me? Okay, putting that aside, I kind of expected knight d4, which is also a usual human way to continue the position, going away from the exchange as of now, blocking the isolated pawn. And I've prepared knight e6. This was the point of my bishop g4 move, because I obviously don't want to exchange pieces if I have the isolated pawn. But my idea was that if my opponent takes, I take with the f pawn. And after the game, my opponent said that he didn't really thought about it. He didn't really think about it. Only after he took and I took some time to recapture the knight, then he thought, okay, maybe I'm planning to take with the f pawn. The idea is that as of now, I no longer have the isolani pawn structure, and my bishop, even though it seemed like it's locked, he will have a nice reroute to the game whenever, wherever I want him to. And I found this position a very interesting one, so I decided, okay, let's go for it. In this moment, my opponent chose h3. I simply also went away, and now queen b3 was played. And yeah, in here I believe I have yet another critical moment. So once more, I don't have that many choices due to the fact that the b8 square is taken, so I cannot play a simple move like this and stop caring about the situation. I need to really deal with the matter. So b5 is on the menu perhaps, but once more, how would I then evaluate the situation after a4? It might be practically hard for me, I guess. Then queen d7 might be an option, but then knight a4 is coming. This is the fork coming on. This is the line on which the bishop and the rook can cooperate quite nicely against my queen. So I was not like really stuck at this point, but I felt like it's the most important part of the middle game. And I found a very nice idea that my opponent admitted that he also missed when playing queen b3. And this idea was knight d7. I am basically saying that I like the knights, I like the forks. So as of now, the pawn obviously cannot be taken because I would be getting the material advantage. But the idea behind it is also that even though it may seem wrong and counterintuitive, bishop b1 is a strong move, because okay, it blocks the rook, it closes the rook, but it prepares also queen c2 idea, making use of my bad light squares around the king, with the idea being also that the pawn is under the attack, the knight is on the queen side as of now, so either I continue with knight c5, protecting the pawn, kicking away the queen, but then my knight is no longer the defender of the king, so I might face some difficulties there, or I go back sooner or later and maybe leave the pawn to be taken. So the whole queen b3, bishop b1 scenario was really good tactically, but both moves did not seem so natural because the queen wastes one more tempo and the bishop does too, and also it blocks the rook. So even though it seems like white is on the verge of really developing a big attack, I felt like it has to be something wrong about it. And at this moment, and also before playing knight d7, I was thinking what to do at this specific point, because I have the problem, okay, should I protect here or here? Should I move the knight or not? And I've decided to play rook e8 move. That was a very hard find, I would say, so I am particularly proud of those two moves one by one, because what's the idea behind it? Well, if my opponent now goes queen c2, I've created space for my knight to go back to f8, not to f6 because then it might be attacked maybe. On f8 it's perfectly placed, it protects all the squares and I'm happy. This pawn is also fine, and if my opponent takes the pawn, we'll see how it went because it was played in the game. And knight c5, obvious way, right? And then the problem is, okay, where does the queen go? If she goes here or there, those are basically the two only choices. Queen c6 is losing because the queen is trapped. So I felt like queen b3 is the better way to play, because after knight d3, queen d4, knight f4, queen f4, we both evaluated this position, me and my opponent, as a as the one when I have the initiative, but I would have to maybe prove it or maybe not, because b2 pawn is hanging and all the pieces there too. So yeah, maybe that's the reason why my opponent particularly didn't like this variation, but for me it was not so obvious during the game, and I felt like queen b4 might be superior, because after queen c7 it was much easier for me to calculate the variation and the initiative that I am growing as of now, because after the trade I have bishop f6, putting the pressure to those weak squares. I am planning on playing rook c8, rook b8, and basically by force getting the material back, and if that's the case, otherwise strategically I should not be dealing with any problems, so I knew that my position should be equal-ish already. So I was happy with that. So as I've said, going back for a second to this point, this was the critical moment of the game, and I'm proud that I found both knight d7 and rook e8 moves, because those were natural responses to not so natural way of playing from white, as an attempt to be very precise tactically but strategically not so sound. So I proved it wrong by, let's say, relying on tactics combined with strategy. So I achieved such position in which the queens were off the board. I got the initiative thanks to the bishop, thanks to the rook, thanks to the knight. So it's more or less forced, all of this that we are seeing as of now. And yeah, in here I am playing a4, pinning the bishops, hitting them. Bishop b4 is the only way of continuing this, really. And then I had decision to make in here, I guess, because the most obvious way to play was to play rook c6, and I chose that. But for the brief second I decided, I considered the rook c7, because after rook bishop d1 takes, with rook being there, I might have had an idea of knight d8 with knight c6, and then later on rerouting to the c4 square this way or the other, maybe making the case of the great knight against bad bishop and trying to outplay my opponent in the endgame. But also I felt like my opponent is too solid. All I have is basically good knight and maybe one weakness, so it would be inefficient to win the game. So I just decided against those tricky maneuvers, let's say, and went with rook to c6, and after bishop d1 I exchanged, and at this point actually my opponent offered me a draw. If he wouldn't do it, perhaps it would be my turn to do it shorty, so I agreed to the draw. As you can tell, it's 0.00 evaluation, and as I've said, practically speaking, I am a little bit better. It should be easier for me to navigate the position, but I felt like it's not enough of play in the position to actually win this, so I accepted the draw offer, and yet another draw against this guy. I'm very happy with that, and also I'm very happy with the scenario that occurred in the game. I played very well. I was so happy with my decisions that it made me feel great, basically. After the fast start to the tournament, it was a great feeling. So yeah, thank you guys for watching this analysis. I hope you liked it as much as I did, and what this draw meant is that in the next round I would be having one more better opponent, so couldn't wait for it. If you can't wait for it too, please remember to subscribe and leave a like, and we'll see each other tomorrow for yet another good game, this time with white pieces. Stay tuned for it, and bye bye. Thank you.